کنفرانس بین المللی ایران چشمانداز تغییر 29 ژوئن 2018. پنل اول سیاست صحیح در قبال ایران.
I think we ought to be focused on the big issues, and trade deficits are not one of them. We would be much better to be focused on the threat that is posed by Iran and be working with our European allies to try to bring them along, because I agree with Senator Torricelli and former Foreign Minister Terzi that if we're going to have change, it's going to have to be led by the Iranian people. There is not going to be a military response that will change the regime. This is going to have to be a democratic revolt by the Iranian people.
Thank you, Lynda.
I'm not a politician. I look at it in simple terms. You know, Iran, the country, historically so rich in culture, actually so progressive. And under this regime, hundreds of thousands of people have been executed. Basic human rights are ignored. And especially with the women, they are so oppressed. They can't ever be president, can't be a judge. We saw it in December, January, over 142 demonstrations. But the most impressive was the last few days ago in Tehran. All those people coming out, their economies in shambles, the real is not worth anything. So that's very important that it is coming from an organic source, but they are going to need help. We can continue to do economic sanctions. We can ask our European allies to go in on that line of thinking. I think we're going to see it in our lifetime for a free Iran. And it's important. And it's important to us, whether you're European or American, because Iran is the #1 supporter of terrorism. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I guess I would start off by saying maybe something we could all agree on is, you know, what a difference a year makes when you think of where Iran was and the United States policy was last year versus where it is today. You know, I mean, at least we know where we stand, right? And we also know that where we stand is working. So in terms of policy recommendations, I would offer 3. Well, actually 1 with 3 sort of underneath it is policy recommendation. The basic policy recommendation is double down on the sanctions and double down on the pressure on the Iranian regime, because that is the only thing that's going to A, bring it down, B, create a better future for the Iranian people. What does double down on the sanctions require? Number 1, enforcement of those sanctions. What's critical is cutting Iran off from the international banking system, making sure they can't use SWIFT, making sure that other central banks to our European friends, other central banks that might engage in currency transactions with the Iranian regime be sanctioned. This is going to require a great degree of political will from the United States. Enforcing secondary sanctions, meaning those companies that do business with Iran, we sanction them and their assets. And finally, on the oil, cutting Iran off from the international oil markets, which the United States administration is committed to doing, and which is the right thing to do. Second, I think the second policy recommendation after doubling down on the sanctions is, I think it's important that we and our colleague from Italy talked about this a little bit. I think it's important that we expand the international coalition that is isolating Iran. And we've talked about the Europeans. I think the Europeans are absolutely critical in making the sanctions work. But also, I think we need to, and we're doing this, but is to expand the coalition of the Middle East states that are working to isolate Iran. The final policy recommendation on how we can, the United States policy can support change in Iran is, I guess, getting to the point that really matters, which is the Iranian people. So let's remember that as we see these protests growing, in the bazaar, citizens marching on parliament, in every city and hamlet throughout Iran, a well-timed, high-profile statement of support by prominent Americans means a whole heck of a lot, and we should use that weapon strategically. So anyway, I'll stop there. Double down on sanctions, broaden the coalition and enhance cooperation between the coalition, and provide explicit support, continuous, verbal, high-profile support to the Iranian people to accelerate the change that's already underway.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you.
To reconstruct a common European, Euro-American front is vital. On what basis can it be done? I think the 12 points of Secretary Pompeo. And of course, rationally, as Congressman Torricelli already explained, obviously, this regime cannot do it. And the implication is clear for all of us. I do not think, however, that this implication shall be put as such on the table. One thing is to know rationally what is the outcome. The other thing is to say, well, have you anything to object to any of these 12 points? Aren't they the minimum of normal relations for that we have to demand for whoever to be in the Council of Nations? That's the question I think has to be raised. The second issue is really this trade. After the United States announced their way out of the nuclear deal, one very important personality in the Iranian regime said the following: well, it's now time to say to our European friends, either you find a way to keep this agreement on, or we will ask back the money we gave you. He said that on record. It is transcripted. And there was a silence from the European side. Actually, just afterwards, the Foreign Affairs Minister came to Brussels. He saw Mrs. Mogherini. I mean, no explanation was given. I made a complaint to the fraud authorities in Europe about that. They said, oh, we do not have evidence to launch an inquiry. I mean, what more evidence do you need? So this issue is vital. I mean, why is Iran so important in economic terms? I mean, if you look at the figures, of course, Iran has a lot of potential. It's true. Certainly, if it gets rid of its clerics. But in terms of GDP, it does not justify the political investment that the European leaders are doing. There must be a reason to do it. Of course, IRGC and the religious foundations are controlling most of the economy, and of course, this makes a deal more effective than with a market economy. But there must be some reasons that are under the table and that we should demand to go over the table for us to understand what is going on. Thank you very much, in particular.
Thank you, Dr.